Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's Wednesday in Moscow included a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Tillerson's Moscow visit had been planned for weeks, but it was not clear beforehand if he would meet with Putin. It lasted just about 2 hours. You may notice we're not showing you pictures of that meeting. That's because Secretary Tillerson left his hotel for the Kremlin without telling his traveling press pool. We do, however, have pictures of Tillerson with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. They held a joint news conference Wednesday. Topic number one, Syria and the regime of Bashar al-Assad, where the two men had some differences of opinion.
We did discuss at length the future role for Assad, whether it be in a future political process or not. Clearly, our view is that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end.
Основанные на одержимости смены.
So this fixation on trying to oust this or that dictator, an authoritarian or totalitarian leader, is well known to us, and we know how it ends.
Свергался бы диктатор, и все пошло бы как по маслу.
A successful ouster of a dictator is for me very hard to remember. If you have any examples, I'd be glad if you could share them with me.
Susan Glasser is Chief International Affairs columnist for Politico. She's in our Washington bureau. Susan, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get to substance, help us, Susan, unpack some of this diplomatic theater. What is the point of President Putin apparently waiting until the last minute to invite Secretary Tillerson for a meeting?
Well, you know, American secretaries of state have definitely seen this drill before, and it's classic Vladimir Putin. It's classic Kremlin protocol, really, to keep Americans guessing. It's a reminder of who's really the boss, and Putin really has been like this ever since he became president. I was there at the very first meeting between Vladimir Putin and the American press corps back in the spring of 2001, and guess what? He kept us waiting for about 2 hours. Our interview with him didn't end until close to midnight.
Wow, 2 hours. So I don't want to belabor this point, but there's an issue of respect here from what you can gather, the notion that you'll basically have to just wait until President Putin is good and ready to meet with you.
Yes, that's right. That is definitely the message. And again, it's all part of a much more negative surround sound than any of us really anticipated for this first meeting between Rex Tillerson and the Russians on their home turf in Moscow. Remember, we thought that Donald Trump was going to be the architect of a new reset, if you will, with Russia. Instead, they're meeting each other in a very even hostile atmosphere. And I think the surround sound today of the meetings, as you saw with Sergei Lavrov there and Rex Tillerson, was definitely not all hugs and smiles.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Secretary Tillerson sat at his news conference next to the foreign minister Lavrov and said the state of U.S.-Russian relations is at a quote-unquote low point. Why would he say that so bluntly, so directly, while on a diplomatic visit to Russia?
Well, you know, look, on the one hand, you know, you like to proclaim it's at a low point so that you can turn around and prove that you've accomplished something. And I think they still hold out hopes of a better relationship. In the short term, if anything, there was the perception here in Washington of so much closeness between the Trump team and Russia. There was a question about the political effectiveness in the other direction. And of course, there's still these unfolding investigations here in Washington of whether there was any collusion between the Trump team and Moscow during the 2016 election hacking. And so, you know, it's almost paradoxical, but it might have actually held both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump to take a little bit of a step back with this whole Syria missile strike. And, you know, maybe it gives each of them a little bit more political maneuvering room. So we really don't know how this story goes, but certainly nobody expected, given Donald Trump's extensive praise for Vladimir Putin, that Rex Tillerson would be headed to Moscow under this kind of atmosphere.
Well, earlier, Lavrov seemed to mock the Trump administration for its lack of a unified message on Syria. But I wonder, Susan, do you see any potential tactical advantage for the U.S. to perhaps be vague about its specific intentions?
Well, of course. Look, first of all, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, he's the longest-serving foreign minister of the post-Cold War. He's a very savvy observer of the United States. He's a very tough negotiator, and he's been around this fence many times with John Kerry, with Hillary Clinton when it comes to Syria. And so, you know, Rex Tillerson is not starting out at an advantage when he comes to Moscow, you know, rattling Tomahawk missiles and sabers and says, you guys really should let go of your proxy, Bashar al-Assad. That's not necessarily a front door that's going to open wide just because Donald Trump and Rex Tillerson have come knocking.
What do you make of the fact that Rex Tillerson ditched his press pool?
Well, you know, look, this has been an issue since Rex Tillerson was sworn in. He's perhaps been the single most hostile to the press Secretary of State, you know, really ever, or of the modern period. And he's downgraded the daily press briefings from the State Department that had been an important statement of American foreign policy since 1953. And Rex Tillerson has come in. He said, basically, I have zero desire to engage with the press. He's only given one real interview, and then he did a round of Sunday show interviews after the Syria missile strike. He's refused consistently to bring the regular traveling press with him, as all other secretaries of state, both Democrat and Republican, have done for years. And the result is that you're allowing the Russians to control the message in many ways. You're allowing the Chinese to control the message. And it has struck people as not just a violation of protocol with the press, but really a downgrading of the tools of American diplomacy in ways that nobody understands why the Trump administration would want to do that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Well, let me ask you, Susan, given the statements that we have seen, not just this week, from Russian officials, help us understand what it is that Russian President Vladimir Putin wants from the Trump administration. Do we have a sense of that?
You know, look, actually, I think we have more of a clear sense of what Vladimir Putin wants from the Trump administration than we do what exactly the Trump administration is going to do about Vladimir Putin. Putin has been quite consistent in his articulation and his view of the Russian national interest. He wants to be left alone, first and foremost, within what he considers to be Russia's traditional sphere of influence. Now, unfortunately for his neighbors, that includes neighboring independent countries like Ukraine, even like the Baltics or like Georgia. And the United States has not always been willing to cede that sphere of influence to Russia. So that's number one, what Putin wants. Number two, and really it's important to consider with everything, Putin is concerned with his own regime's survival. He's concerned first and foremost to stay in power. And they object to the Americans, as you heard Sergei Lavrov in that clip. They object to what they perceive as American meddling in countries to overthrow the governments of other countries. And so now that's where they really have their backup. We're not going to let go of Bashar al-Assad because you say that we should. And they cite American interventions in Libya and in the Balkans in the 1990s, and of course in Ukraine. They claim America somehow triggered the revolution in Ukraine. And this is primarily where you see almost like the merger of Putin's desire for his domestic survival and his objections to American foreign policy. And so they want America to stay out of their business as they define it.
It'll be fascinating to watch how this relationship with Russia unfolds. Susan Glasser in our Washington bureau, thanks very much. Really great to have your insights. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me today.